This is Vesna Vulovic. 50 years ago, she fell 33,333 feet from the sky.
December 24th, 1971, Lanza Flight 508 from Lima to Pucallpa, Peru, was struck by lightning.
Royal Air Force tail gunner Nicholas Alcamad was flying his Avro Lancaster heavy bomber when he was hit by German flak. He would later reflect, quote, "I had no doubts at all that this was the end of the line. The question was whether to stay in the plane and fry or jump to my death."
5 people who fell from impossible heights and lived to tell stories that defy everything we know about death, fate, and the fragile thread that separates us from oblivion. 33,330 feet above Yugoslavia, a young flight attendant named Vesna is serving coffee when the world explodes around her. The aircraft disintegrates. She's thrown into the void, conscious, watching the Earth rush toward her at terminal velocity. No parachute. No hope. She should have died. Instead, she became a legend. Survival is only the headline. The aftermath is the story. Some never fly again. Some go back to war. One returns to the jungle that saved her. Today, we are going to see the darkest edge of human survival. 5 people who fell from impossible heights and lived to tell stories that defy everything we know about death, fate, and the fragile thread that separates us from oblivion. Starting with a teenager who learned that sometimes the most dangerous place on Earth can also be your salvation.
December 24th, 1971, Lanza Flight 508 from Lima to Pucallpa, Peru, was struck by lightning. Now considered the deadliest lightning strike in aviation history, it caused a crash that ultimately led to the demise of everyone on board, except for one 17-year-old girl.
Christmas Eve, 1971. 17-year-old Julianne Koepka sits beside her mother on Lanza Flight 508, flying over the Amazon rainforest. She's heading home to celebrate the holidays with her father, a zoologist who taught her to read the jungle like a book. The turbulence starts without warning. Lightning splits the sky. Then comes the sound no passenger should ever hear: metal tearing apart. Julianne's last memory inside the plane is her mother reaching for her hand. Then she's falling, still strapped to her seat. 10,000 feet above the most dangerous wilderness on Earth, she hits the canopy at over 100 miles per hour. The seat breaks her fall through layers of branches, each impact slowing her descent just enough. When she finally stops, she's alone in a crater of broken trees, her collarbone shattered, her eye swollen shut. But Julianne isn't just any teenager lost in the Amazon. Her father spent years teaching her jungle survival. She knows that following water downstream leads to civilization. She knows which insects to avoid, which sounds mean danger. 10 days of green hell. Her wounds become infected with maggots. She survives on candy she finds scattered from the wreckage. At night, she hears jaguars prowling. During the day, she follows streams that seem to lead nowhere. On the 9th day, she finds a boat moored near a crude shelter. She pours gasoline on her infected wounds, and 35 maggots fall out of the gash in her arm. When 3 local men find her the next morning, they don't believe her story. A blonde teenager, alone, claiming she fell from an airplane? Impossible. But Julianne guides rescue teams to the crash site. They find her mother's body and 91 others. She's the sole survivor of Peru's deadliest aviation disaster. The girl who fell through green hell grows up to become Dr. Julianne Diller, a zoologist like her father. She returns to the Amazon regularly, not to confront her trauma, but because the jungle that nearly killed her also saved her. But falling into the Amazon is one thing. Choosing to jump without a parachute is something else entirely.
Royal Air Force tail gunner Nicholas Alcamad was flying his Avro Lancaster heavy bomber when he was hit by German flak. His parachute then caught fire, and there seemed to be no chance of surviving a burning aircraft spiraling out of control. As the flames increased and the turret fluids ignited, Alcamad's clothes caught fire too. He would later reflect, quote, I had no doubts at all that this was the end of the line. The question was whether to stay in the plane and fry or jump to my death.
March 23rd, 1944. RAF Sergeant Nicholas Alcamaid is trapped in a burning Lancaster bomber 18,000 feet above Germany. As the rear gunner, he's furthest from the escape hatch. Flames engulf the aircraft. His parachute is destroyed. He has two choices: burn alive or jump without a parachute. In the roar, there's a moment of impossible quiet. No cockpit, no parachute, just wind, stars, and a decision. He lets go. Nicholas chooses the void. He falls for 3.5 minutes, enough time to say goodbye to his life, his wife, his unborn child. The German countryside rushes up at him like a dark tide. He crashes through pine branches into a snowbank, unconscious but breathing. When he wakes, German soldiers are standing over him, rifles drawn. They don't believe his story either. A man cannot fall 18,000 feet and live. They march him to the crash site. The wreckage is still smoldering, his burned parachute clearly visible in the debris. Only then do they accept what seems impossible. Nicholas spends the rest of the war in a German POW camp. His captors treat him with strange reverence, not as a prisoner, but as something beyond their understanding. Word spreads through the camp: the Englishman who fell from heaven. After the war, Nicholas returns to his old job in a furniture factory. He marries his sweetheart, raises children, lives a quiet life, but he never flies again. Never needs to. He dies in 1987, 43 years after cheating death. How do you fall 18,000 feet and go back to making chairs? He never says. At this point, you might think it's luck, but it isn't. At least, not only. 3 things decide whether a human survives a fall: what slows you, what you hit, and how your body meets the ground. Forests, snow, branches, they turn a single fatal impact into many smaller ones. But what if there's no cushion at all? Only glass and concrete. But luck can only explain so much. What happens next makes even physics look like a bad guess. Sometimes choice is taken away completely. Sometimes you don't get to decide how you fall. You just fall. January 3rd, 1943. Staff Sergeant Alan Eugene Meiji is trapped in the plexiglass bubble beneath a B-17 flying fortress, 22,000 feet above occupied France. German fighters have shredded his bomber. The aircraft is breaking apart. Unlike Nicholas, Alan doesn't choose to jump. The disintegrating plane throws him out, unconscious, bleeding, spinning toward Earth like a broken doll. He smashes through the glass roof of the Saint-Nazaire railway station at terminal velocity. The impact should have vaporized him. Instead, the glass ceiling breaks his fall just enough, and he crashes onto the concrete platform below. German soldiers find him surrounded by shattered glass and twisted metal, barely alive but breathing. 28 broken bones, internal bleeding, glass everywhere. But Alan Eugene Meiji is conscious, and he's asking for water. The German doctors can't explain it. The physics don't work. A human body hitting concrete at that speed should liquefy. Yet here's an American airman, broken but whole, talking to his captors in a mixture of English and barely remembered French. Alan spends the rest of the war in German hospitals and prison camps. His broken bones heal crooked. His internal injuries leave permanent scars. He develops a limp that will follow him for life. But he survives, returns home to New Jersey, marries, raises a family, works as a truck driver for decades, never mentioning the war, never talking about the fall. His children only learn about the railway station when reporters track him down in the 1980s. By then, Alan is in his 60s, still walking with that slight limp, still preferring to keep his miracle private. He dies in 2003. Taking with him the memory of those seconds of consciousness inside the glass roof. But what happens when survival becomes a calculated gamble? When you have a parachute, but using it means certain death? January 1942. Senior Lieutenant Ivan Mikhailovich Chisov is flying his Ilyushin Il-4 bomber through Soviet airspace when German fighters appear like wolves in the winter sky. His aircraft is hit. The fuel tanks ignite. 23,000 feet, a working parachute, and a death sentence if he opens it. German fighters circle below. A slow canopy is target practice, so Ivan jumps fast to live fast, planning to yank the cord at the last possible breath. But at that altitude, consciousness becomes the enemy. The lack of oxygen hits him like a sledgehammer. Ivan passes out during the fall, his hand frozen inches from the ripcord he never gets to pull. He hits the edge of a ravine at the bottom of a snowy slope at over 120 miles per hour. The impact drives him 40 feet down into the snow and frozen earth. When villagers dig him out 3 hours later, they expect to find a corpse. Instead, they find Ivan Chisov, unconscious but alive. His pelvis is shattered, his spine is fractured, but his pulse is steady, his breathing regular. Ivan spends months recovering in a Moscow hospital. Soviet doctors conclude that the extreme cold preserved his body during the fall, while the unconsciousness saved him from the fatal shock of knowing he was about to die. There's one thing Ivan never puts in a medical chart. He remembers a flash of clarity, like a hand on his shoulder, aiming him at the only place that wouldn't kill him. In that moment, he swears something guided his unconscious body toward the ravine, positioning him for the only landing spot that wouldn't mean instant death. Ivan returns to combat duty within a year, flies dozens more missions, survives the entire war. He never speaks publicly about the fall until the 1980s, and even then, he leaves out the part about that final moment of clarity. He died in 1986, carrying that secret with him. Yet all of these falls pale in comparison to what happened on a routine afternoon flight over Czechoslovakia, January 26, 1972.
This is Vesna Vulovic. 50 years ago, she fell 33,333 feet from the sky. And this is the curious case of the highest fall survived without a parachute.
Flight attendant Vesna Vulovic is about to experience something so impossible that it will haunt survival experts for decades. She's new to the job, just started flying international routes. This was supposed to be a routine flight from Stockholm to Belgrade, but at 4:01 p.m., a BM explodes in the baggage compartment. The McDonnell Douglas DC-9 disintegrates instantly. 27 people are thrown into the void above the Bohemian Mountains. Only one survives the fall. Vesna wakes up in a Czechoslovakian hospital 3 days later, paralyzed from the waist down, with no memory of the explosion or the fall. The doctors tell her she fell 33,330 feet, a world record that will never be broken because no one else could possibly survive it. The physics are impossible here. Terminal velocity at that altitude means she hit the ground at over 120 miles per hour. The human body becomes liquid at that speed. Mountains are not forgiving landing surfaces, yet here she is, breathing, talking, asking about the other passengers. When they tell her she's the only survivor, something breaks inside her that will never fully heal. Vesna spends months learning to walk again. Her spine is fractured in 3 places. Her pelvis is shattered. She has a fractured skull, broken legs, 3 broken vertebrae, but she's alive, and that becomes both a miracle and a curse. The Yugoslavian government makes her a national hero. The media calls her the miracle of Flight 367. Vesna eventually returns to work for Jati Airways, not as a flight attendant, but in a desk job. She refuses to fly again for years. When she finally boards another plane, she has panic attacks. Vesna retired in the 1990s and lived quietly in Belgrade until her passing in 2016. 5 people. 20 miles of empty air. Math explains part of it. The rest feels like the universe blinking. Maybe it's branches and snow. Maybe it's angles and luck. Or maybe when everything falls away, something in us refuses. Which of these survivors would you want to meet? Which fall terrifies you the most? And do you think these were miracles or just impossible physics? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe for more content like this.